Lisa Crawford walked down the long metal corridor of the Grand Council station. Her shoes made soft clicking sounds on the floor. She had been here for 1 week now, serving as Earth's ambassador to the Galactic Council. The station was huge, bigger than any city she had ever seen. It floated in space around a distant planet, home to representatives from dozens of alien species. Something strange caught her attention during her daily walks. Every other species moved in groups. The tall, blue-skinned Zephyrians always traveled in groups of 12. Their silver robes rustled as they glided down the hallways together. The crystalline Vortani, who looked like walking diamonds, never moved in groups smaller than 8. Even when they went to get food or visit the library, they stayed together. The massive Kronak warriors, each one as big as a small truck, moved in formations of 6. Their heavy footsteps shook the floor when they passed. Lisa had seen many other species too. The floating jellyfish-like ethereals, the metal robots called the Nexus Collective, and the furry Talaxians. All of them moved in groups. Always groups, but humans walked alone. Lisa noticed this when she went to the cafeteria for lunch. She walked by herself through 3 kilometers of corridors. Other beings stopped and stared at her. Some pointed with whatever they used for hands. Others made worried sounds in their alien languages. A few quickly moved away from her path as if she carried some kind of disease. In the cafeteria, she sat at a table by herself. This seemed to shock the other diners even more. A group of Vortani at the next table kept looking at her with their crystal eyes. They whispered to each other in voices that sounded like wind chimes. After lunch, Lisa decided to visit Dr. Kevin Martinez. He was the only other human on the station besides her security team. Kevin worked as a xenobiologist studying alien life forms. His lab was located in the science section, 15 minutes away by foot. Kevin was examining some kind of purple plant when Lisa arrived. He looked up from his microscope and smiled. "Hey Lisa, how's the ambassador business going?" "Strange," Lisa said, sitting down on a chair near his desk. "Kevin, have you noticed anything weird about how the aliens move around this station?" Kevin put down his tools and thought for a moment. "You mean how they all travel in packs? Yeah, I've been documenting that for months. It's fascinating from a behavioral standpoint." "Documenting it?" Kevin walked over to his computer and pulled up a file. The screen showed charts and graphs with different colored lines. "Look at this. I've been tracking movement patterns for 6 months. The Zephyrians never go anywhere alone. Never. The smallest group I've recorded was 8 individuals, and that was during an emergency drill." He pointed to another chart. "The Kronak are interesting too. They're warriors, right? You'd think they'd be confident enough to walk alone, but no. Minimum group size is 4, average is 6. Lisa leaned forward to look at the data. "What about the robot species?" "The Nexus Collective?" "Even weirder," Kevin said, pulling up more charts. "They're connected by quantum networks. They share thoughts instantly across vast distances, but they still move in groups of 4 or more when they're on the station. Think about that. Beings who are never truly alone because they share a collective consciousness still won't walk these halls by themselves." Lisa felt a chill run down her spine. "But we do, exactly. Every human on this station walks alone regularly. You, me, Captain Fletcher and his security team, Engineer Foster, Maintenance Chief Sullivan. We all do it without thinking twice." Kevin brought up one more chart. This one showed human movement patterns. Unlike the tight grouped patterns of the alien species, the human data looked scattered and random. Single dots moving independently through the station's corridors. "I've asked some of the aliens about it," Kevin continued. "Most won't talk about it. When I push for answers, they get nervous and change the subject. A few have mentioned something about dangerous spaces and things that hunt in shadows, but they won't give me details." Lisa remembered her conversation with Veltar, her Zephyrian liaison. She had asked him about the group movement patterns during her second day on the station. His usual calm demeanor had cracked for just a moment. His silver eyes had widened and he had looked around nervously before answering. "There are protocols," he had said in his musical voice. "Safety protocols that all species follow. The spaces between inhabited areas can be difficult." When Lisa had asked for clarification, Veltar had become even more uncomfortable. "Some things are best left undiscussed, Ambassador Crawford. Your species will learn these things in time. For now, please trust that these protocols exist for good reasons." She had tried to press him for more information, but he had quickly excused himself and left. Since then, he had avoided the topic entirely. I think there's something they're not telling us, Lisa told Kevin. Something they're afraid of. Kevin nodded. I've had the same thought. The question is, why aren't we afraid of it too? What makes humans different? Before Lisa could answer, the lab door opened. Jake Sullivan, the station's maintenance chief, walked in. He was a big man with rough hands and a friendly smile. Jake had worked on space stations for 20 years before taking this job. Hey Doc, Ambassador, he said, nodding to both of them. Mind if I interrupt? I need to check the air filtration system in here. Of course, Kevin said. Jake, can I ask you something? Have you ever felt uncomfortable walking around the station alone? Jake laughed as he opened a panel on the wall. Uncomfortable? Nah. Though I gotta say, some of the sub-levels get pretty spooky. Long corridors, dim lighting, lots of shadows. But that's just how space stations are. You get used to it. Do you ever see other species down in the sub-levels? Lisa asked. Never alone, Jake said, checking some wires inside the panel. Sometimes I'll see maintenance teams from other species, but they always work in groups. Even for simple jobs that only need one person. I always figured it was just their way of doing things. Jake finished his work and closed the panel. Though I'll tell you something weird. Sometimes when I'm working alone down there, I get the feeling I'm being watched. Not by cameras or anything, just watched. But it doesn't bother me much. After Jake left, Lisa and Kevin sat in silence for a few minutes. Finally, Kevin spoke. I think we need to do some research, find out what's really going on in those corridors, why every other species is afraid to walk alone and why we're not. Lisa nodded. I'll see what I can access through the diplomatic archives. There might be historical records that explain these safety protocols. As Lisa walked back to her quarters that evening, she paid closer attention to her surroundings. The corridors were indeed long and dimly lit between sections. Shadows gathered in alcoves and maintenance passages. Strange sounds echoed from the ventilation systems. But she felt no fear, only curiosity. Behind her, she thought she heard footsteps. But when she turned around, the corridor was empty. She shrugged and continued walking, unaware that something ancient and hungry watched her from the shadows, confused by her lack of fear. Jake Sullivan checked his work schedule on his tablet as he walked through the main corridor. The human quarters needed new air filters, and he had 3 hours before the next shift change. The fastest route was through sub-level 7, which most people avoided. Jake didn't mind. He had walked through stranger places during his 20 years working on space stations. He took the service elevator down to sub-level 7. The doors opened with a soft hiss, revealing a dimly lit corridor that stretched far into the darkness. Emergency lighting cast yellow pools of light every 50 meters, leaving long sections of shadow between them. The air here smelled different, metallic and old, with a hint of something Jake couldn't identify. His footsteps echoed off the metal walls as he walked. The corridor was wide enough for maintenance vehicles, but Jake had never seen any down here. He carried his tool bag in one hand and a portable light in the other, though he didn't turn it on yet. The emergency lighting was enough to see by. After walking for 10 minutes, Jake noticed something odd. His footsteps weren't the only sounds echoing in the corridor. There was another sound, softer and irregular. It sounded almost like footsteps, but not quite. They didn't match his rhythm, and they seemed to come from different directions. Jake stopped walking and listened. The other sounds stopped too, but not immediately. They faded away like an echo that lasted too long. He shrugged and continued walking. Old space stations made all kinds of noises. Pipes settling, metal expanding and contracting, air moving through vents. Nothing to worry about. But the feeling of being watched grew stronger with each step. Jake had felt this before in other places. Abandoned mining stations, derelict ships, old colonies. Some places just felt occupied even when they were empty. He had learned not to let it bother him. Fear was useless when you had work to do. The shadows between the lights seemed darker than they should be. Jake noticed that some of them moved in ways that didn't match the steady emergency lighting. A shadow would shift when no one was there to cast it or stretch in the wrong direction. He saw these movements from the corner of his eye, but when he looked directly, everything appeared normal. Halfway through the corridor, Jake heard something that made him stop. It was a whisper, so soft he almost missed it. The words weren't in any language he recognized, but somehow they felt familiar. They sounded old, older than civilization itself. The whispers seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Jake turned around slowly. Behind him, the corridor looked the same as always, empty and dimly lit. But something was different. The shadows seemed deeper and the air felt thicker. He could smell that strange scent more strongly now, like sulfur mixed with ozone, the smell of lightning and burning metal. "I know you're there," Jake said out loud. His voice echoed down the corridor. The whispers stopped. Jake had dealt with strange situations before. Once, on a mining station near Jupiter, he had worked alone for 3 months with only an AI for company. The isolation had made him hear things and see things that weren't there. But this felt different. This felt real. "Look, I don't know what you are," Jake continued, speaking to the empty corridor, "but I've got work to do. 3 air filters need replacing, and I'm not going to let you scare me away from doing my job." Something moved in the shadows ahead of him, not a normal shadow cast by an object, but something that existed independently. It flowed like liquid darkness, changing shape as it moved. Jake caught glimpses of what might have been eyes, ancient and intelligent, but hungry in a way that made his skin crawl. Most people would have run. Most people would have screamed or called for help. Jake just sighed and started walking again. "You know," he said, talking to the shadow as if it were a coworker, "this corridor could use better lighting. These emergency strips are at least 30 years old. I bet maintenance requests get ignored down here because nobody likes coming to sublevel 7. The shadow followed him, staying just at the edge of his vision. Jake could feel its attention like a cold weight on his shoulders. But instead of fear, he felt something closer to annoyance. He had a schedule to keep. "The air circulation is pretty poor, too," Jake continued, checking a wall panel as he walked. "Probably why it smells so strange down here. When's the last time anyone cleaned the ventilation systems? I bet it's been decades." The presence in the shadows seemed confused by his reaction. Jake could sense its uncertainty, though he couldn't explain how he knew what it was feeling. The whispers started again, but quieter now, almost questioning. Jake reached the maintenance access point for the human quarters. He set down his tool bag and opened the panel that controlled the air filtration system. The work was routine: disconnect old filters, install new ones, run a diagnostic check. He had done it thousands of times before. While he worked, he kept talking to the shadow. "You've been alone down here for a while, haven't you?" Jake said, replacing the first filter. "I bet you don't get much company. Most folks seem afraid to walk alone in these corridors." The shadow moved closer, but not in a threatening way. It seemed curious about what Jake was doing. "I used to work alone a lot," Jake continued. "Space mining, deep exploration, colony setup. You spend months or years with nobody to talk to except computers. It can drive you crazy if you let it, but it can also teach you things about yourself." Jake finished installing the second filter and moved on to the third. The shadow watched him work, its ancient eyes reflecting the emergency lighting in strange ways. "The thing about being alone," Jake said, "is that it's not the same as being lonely. Alone is just a physical state. Lonely is something else entirely. You can be alone and perfectly happy, or you can be surrounded by people and feel completely isolated." The shadow made a sound that wasn't quite a whisper. It sounded almost like a question. "Yeah, I think you understand loneliness," Jake said, finishing his work and closing the panel. "How long have you been down here? 50 years? 100? Longer?" Jake packed up his tools and stood up. The shadow hovered nearby, no longer trying to hide from him. "Well, I've got to get back to work," Jake said. "But this was interesting. If you ever want to talk again, I'm usually down here on Tuesdays and Fridays for routine maintenance." As Jake walked away, the shadow followed him for a short distance, then stopped. It watched him disappear around a corner, leaving behind only the echo of his footsteps and the faint smell of ozone. For the first time in thousands of years, the ancient thing in the shadows felt something other than hunger or anger. It felt curiosity about the strange being who had spoken to it without fear, who had treated it like a person instead of a monster. Jake took the elevator back to the main levels, unaware that he had just done something no other being in the galaxy had ever managed. He had offered friendship to something that had forgotten what friendship meant. When he reported to his supervisor later that day, Jake mentioned that sub-level 7 could use better lighting and ventilation. He didn't mention the shadow or the whispers. Some things were better left as personal experiences. But he did make a mental note to bring a thermos of coffee on his next maintenance run. If he was going to have conversations with ancient shadow creatures, he might as well be comfortable. Lisa Crawford and Dr. Kevin Martinez stood before the massive doors of the Council archives. The building was older than most civilizations, built into the core of the station itself. Ancient symbols covered the doors representing languages that had been forgotten for thousands of years. "Are you sure we have access to the deep historical vault?" Kevin asked, checking his authorization pad. "Ambassador privileges," Lisa replied. "I can access any information that might affect human safety or diplomatic relations." "And this definitely qualifies." The doors recognized Lisa's credentials and opened with a deep resonating hum. Inside, the archives stretched beyond what their eyes could see. Shelves of data crystals, memory cores, and storage devices from dozens of civilizations lined the walls. Holographic displays showed information in hundreds of different languages and formats. An AI construct materialized in front of them, a shimmering blue figure that spoke in a neutral, pleasant voice. "Welcome to the Grand Council Archives. I am Keeper, the archival intelligence. How may I assist you today?" "We need information about the station's history," Lisa said. "Specifically, we want to know about the safety protocols that prevent species from traveling alone in certain areas." Keeper's form flickered slightly. "That information is restricted to level 7 clearance or higher." "I have level 9 diplomatic clearance," Lisa said, showing her credentials. "Accessing." Keeper paused for several seconds. "Very well. Please follow me to the deep vault." They walked through corridors lined with the preserved knowledge of countless civilizations. Kevin stopped occasionally to look at artifacts, crystallized memory matrices from the Vortani, neural pattern storage devices from extinct species, and mechanical data cores older than Earth's recorded history. The deep vault was different from the main archives. Here the walls were made of the same dark metal as the station's core structure. The ceiling disappeared into shadows above them, and the air felt heavy with age and secrets. "The information you seek dates back 53,000 years, Keeper said, materializing a holographic display. To the original construction of this station, the display showed images of the station during its early construction. Instead of the bustling hub of civilization it was now, it had been a simple research facility built around something much older. The station was constructed around a pre-existing structure, Keeper continued, and containment facility built by a coalition of ancient species to imprison what they called a devourer. Kevin leaned forward to study the images. "What exactly is a devourer?" "An ancient predator species that existed before most current civilizations developed space travel. Devourers fed on fear and isolation. They were ambush hunters that targeted individuals who were alone and afraid." Lisa felt a chill run down her spine. "How many of these creatures were there?" "Historical records suggest there were once thousands scattered across the galaxy. This particular specimen is believed to be the last of its kind." The holographic display changed to show technical diagrams of the containment system. The prison was built deep into what was now sub-level 7, surrounded by layers of energy barriers and psionic dampeners. The original builders designed the station's layout to minimize the risk of individuals being isolated, Keeper explained. They created cultural protocols requiring group movement, installed monitoring systems, and established emergency response procedures. Kevin studied the technical specifications. "But if it's contained, why are the protocols still necessary?" "The containment has degraded over time. While the primary prison still holds, the creature's influence has begun to leak into the surrounding areas. It can sense and interact with individuals who are alone in its vicinity." Lisa thought about Jake's experience in sub-level 7. "What happens when someone encounters this creature?" Historical records show 847 documented encounters over the past 50,000 years. In 846 cases, the victim either died from fear-induced cardiac arrest or suffered complete psychological breakdown. The creature feeds on the terror of its prey. "You said 846 out of 847, Kevin noted. "What happened in the remaining case?" Keeper paused, accessing deeper files. "The exception occurred 2.7 years ago. A human maintenance worker named Jake Sullivan encountered the entity during routine repairs. He showed no fear response and engaged in conversation with the creature. The encounter ended peacefully with no harm to either party." Lisa and Kevin exchanged glances. "Are there records of other human encounters?" "Yes. 17 separate incidents involving human personnel over the past 3 years. 0 casualties. 0 psychological trauma. In fact, several subjects reported the encounters as interesting or unusual but not frightening." The holographic display showed a star chart marking the locations of other devourer containment sites throughout the galaxy. Most were marked with red symbols indicating breach events or containment failures. Why are humans different? Lisa asked. Keeper accessed additional files, pulling data from xenobiological databases. Analysis suggests it relates to human evolutionary history. Most sapient species evolved from prey animals or social creatures that relied on group cooperation for survival. Humans evolved from persistence hunters on a hostile world. Images appeared showing Earth's evolutionary timeline, focusing on early human ancestors hunting across vast African plains. Humans are unique in their comfort with solitude and their approach to fear, Keeper continued. While other species experience fear as a paralyzing force that drives them to seek safety in numbers, humans treat fear as information to be processed and acted upon. Kevin pulled up his own research files on his tablet. That matches my behavioral observations. Humans don't just tolerate being alone. We're actually comfortable with it. We evolved to spend long periods in isolation while tracking prey across enormous distances. Furthermore, Keeper added, human psychological profiles show an unusual response to unknown entities. Instead of defaulting to fear or aggression, humans often respond with curiosity and attempts at communication. Lisa thought about this information. So the devourer has spent 50,000 years feeding on the fear of isolated individuals. But when it encounters humans, it encounters beings who are not afraid of being alone and who respond to the unknown with interest rather than terror. Kevin finished. The holographic display changed to show recent monitoring data from Sub-Level 7. Energy readings that had been steady for decades were now fluctuating in unusual patterns. There have been significant changes in the containment area since human arrival, Keeper noted. The entity's behavior patterns have altered dramatically. It appears to be curious about human contact. Lisa felt a growing sense of responsibility. Is the creature dangerous to other species if it escapes? Extremely dangerous. It could potentially kill hundreds before being recontained. However, current data suggests it has no interest in harming humans. Kevin looked at the containment diagrams more closely. How long until the prison fails completely? Estimates vary, but primary containment could fail within 6 months to 2 years. Secondary barriers might hold for an additional year. Lisa made a decision. We need to brief Captain Fletcher immediately, and we need to understand more about this creature's current state. I can provide additional historical records, Keeper offered. There are also classified reports from other containment sites that might prove relevant. As they prepared to leave the deep vault, Kevin asked one more question. Keeper, in your analysis, what makes humans uniquely suited to interact with this entity? Humans appear to be the only species that can recognize the difference between something that is dangerous and something that is lonely, Keeper replied. The devourer has been both for 50,000 years. Lisa and Kevin left the archives with a new understanding of their situation. They weren't just dealing with an ancient monster, they were dealing with the last survivor of an extinct species that had been imprisoned for longer than human civilization had existed. As they walked back through the main corridors, Lisa noticed the group movement patterns of other species with new eyes. Every alien they passed was following protocols developed to protect them from something that had never learned to distinguish between being alone and being lonely, but humans had learned that distinction millions of years ago, when their ancestors first walked alone across endless plains under an alien sky, tracking prey with nothing but patience and determination. Now that same evolutionary trait might be the key to solving a problem that had plagued the galaxy for 50 millennia. The emergency alarm screamed through every corridor of the Grand Council station. Red warning lights flashed in rhythm with the piercing sound. Captain Ryan Fletcher ran through the main hall toward the command center, his security team close behind him. Report, he shouted over the noise as he entered the control room. Commander Veltar, the Zephyrian station coordinator, was surrounded by his usual group of 12 advisors. All of them looked terrified. The primary containment field in Sub-Level 7 has failed, Veltar said, his musical voice shaking with fear. The ancient protocols are now in effect. Ryan looked at the main display screen. Red zones were spreading through the lower levels of the station like a disease. Emergency bulkheads had sealed off entire sections. How many people are trapped in the affected areas? 17 beings from various species, reported Lieutenant Sarah Kim, Ryan second in command. All maintenance and engineering staff. They were performing routine inspections when the breach occurred. What about evacuation? Veltar's silver eyes widened in horror. Impossible. The entity feeds on fear and isolation. Anyone who attempts to move alone through the affected areas will be hunted. Our people are paralyzed with terror. They cannot move, even in groups. Ryan studied the station schematics on his tablet. The red zones covered 40% of the lower levels and were expanding slowly but steadily. What exactly are we dealing with here? A new voice spoke from the entrance to the control room. An ancient predator that's been imprisoned for 50,000 years. Ambassador Lisa Crawford entered with Dr. Kevin Martinez. Both looked grim but determined. Ambassador, this is not the time for diplomatic consultation, Veltar said nervously. This is a crisis beyond your understanding. Actually, it's exactly the time, Lisa replied. She activated her authorization codes and connected her tablet to the main display. Kevin and I have been researching this situation. We know what's down there. The main screen filled with images and data from the archives. Alien representatives throughout the control room made sounds of distress as they saw the historical records of the Devourer. This creature has killed hundreds of beings over the millennia, Kevin explained. It feeds on fear and targets individuals who are alone. But there's something important you need to understand. He brought up his behavioral research data. In the 3 years since humans joined the Council, there have been 19 documented encounters between humans and this entity. 0 casualties, 0 psychological trauma. The control room fell silent except for the continuing alarms. Veltar stared at the data in disbelief. Impossible. No being can encounter a devourer and survive without fear. Humans can, Lisa said simply. We've evolved differently than your species. We're comfortable being alone and we don't respond to the unknown with paralyzing fear. Ryan understood immediately. You want my people to handle the rescue operation? It's the only way, Kevin said. Every other species on this station is biologically programmed to fear isolation. The Devourer feeds on that fear. But humans hunt alone, Ryan finished. He had read enough Earth history to understand their evolutionary background. We've been persistence hunters for millions of years. Being alone isn't scary for us. It's natural. Veltar and his advisors huddled together, speaking rapidly in their musical language. Finally, he turned back to the humans. This is unprecedented. No single species has ever been asked to handle a Devourer breach alone. We're not asking, Lisa said firmly. We're volunteering. And time is running out for those trapped beings. Ryan was already planning the operation. Sarah, get me a full inventory of human personnel on the station. I need volunteers for search and rescue in potentially hostile territory. Sir, that's just 5 people total, Sarah replied. You, me, Dr. Martinez, Ambassador Crawford, and Jake Sullivan. 6, came a voice from the doorway. Engineer Megan Foster entered the control room. She was a small woman with steady hands and calm eyes. I designed half the systems in those lower levels. You'll need me to navigate the service tunnels. Veltar looked horrified. You cannot seriously be considering this. 6 humans against an entity that has terrorized the galaxy for millennia? Not against, Lisa corrected. With. The research shows that this creature isn't evil, it's lonely. It's been imprisoned and isolated for longer than most civilizations have existed. Kevin pulled up additional data on his tablet. Look at the pattern of its escapes. It doesn't kill randomly. It only attacks beings who are afraid of it. When it encountered Jake and later other humans, it showed curiosity rather than aggression. Ryan made his decision. We're going in. Sarah, get the rescue equipment ready. Megan, I need maps of every service tunnel and maintenance passage in the affected areas. Captain Fletcher, Veltar said desperately. If you fail, the entity could escape to the upper levels. Thousands of beings could die. If we don't try, 17 beings will definitely die, Ryan replied. And the creature will eventually break out anyway. At least this way, we have a chance to do something no one has ever tried before. Which is what? Asked a crystalline Vortani representative. Talk to it, Megan said simply. Treat it like a person instead of a monster. The alien representatives made various sounds of disbelief and fear. But Lisa noticed that some of them also looked hopeful. For 50,000 years, their people had lived in fear of the things that hunted in dark spaces. Maybe humans could find a different way. Ryan gathered his team in the armory. They put on environmental suits and took basic rescue equipment, medical supplies, emergency food, communication devices, and cutting tools. No weapons. They had agreed that weapons would send the wrong message to a creature that had spent millennia being treated as a threat. "Remember," Kevin said as they prepared to enter the affected areas. "This entity is intelligent. It's been alive since before most of our civilizations existed. Treat it with respect. And don't be afraid," Lisa added. "Fear is what it feeds on. Our lack of fear is what protects us." Jake Sullivan was waiting for them at the entrance to Sublevel 7. He grinned when he saw the team. "So you guys finally want to meet my friend down there?" "Your friend?" Sarah asked. "Yeah, we've been having conversations during my maintenance rounds. It's actually pretty lonely. Hasn't had a decent chat with anyone in centuries." As they entered the lower levels, the atmosphere changed immediately. The air felt thicker and charged with energy. Shadows moved independently of any light source. Strange whispers echoed from the walls. The environmental suit's sensors detected energy readings that didn't match any known technology. But the humans felt no fear. They felt curiosity, caution, and determination. They moved through the corridors like explorers rather than prey. Behind them, in the control room, Veltar and his advisors watched their progress on tracking screens. For the first time in 50,000 years, someone was walking toward a devourer with confidence instead of terror. "They're either completely insane," whispered a Talaxian representative, "or they're about to change everything we thought we knew about dealing with ancient threats." In the depths of Sublevel 7, something that had been hungry for millennia sensed the approaching humans. But instead of the familiar taste of fear it expected, it sensed something it had almost forgotten existed: the possibility of understanding. For the first time in 50,000 years, the last devourer in the galaxy felt something other than hunger. It felt hope. Megan Foster led the rescue team through the service tunnels of Sublevel 7. The corridors here were darker than anything they had seen before. Emergency lighting flickered and died as they passed. The shadows seemed alive, moving and shifting around them like curious animals. "The trapped beings should be in Section C," Megan said, checking her scanner.
That's where the main environmental controls are located. Behind her, the rest of the team moved with calm determination.
Captain Ryan Fletcher kept track of their route on his tactical display. Dr. Kevin Martinez monitored energy readings that grew stronger with each step. Ambassador Lisa Crawford recorded everything for the official report. Sarah Kim maintained communication with the surface, though static was making it difficult. Jake Sullivan walked at the back of the group, occasionally talking to the shadows. "Yeah, we're here to help," he said to something invisible. "No, we're not afraid of you. We just want to make sure everyone gets home safe." The others had stopped being surprised by Jake's conversations with the entity. If anything, his casual attitude helped them stay relaxed. As they moved deeper into the affected area, the presence around them grew stronger. The whispers became clearer, though still in a language none of them understood. The shadows gathered more densely and the air smelled strongly of ozone and ancient metal. "There," Megan pointed ahead, Section C Environmental Control. They found the trapped beings huddled together in the control room. 3 Vortani engineers sat in a tight cluster, their crystal bodies dim with fear. 2 Chronac technicians had wedged themselves into a corner, their massive forms shaking. 4 Talaxians were piled together in what looked like a furball of terror. The others, representatives from 6 different species, had formed a protective circle in the center of the room. All of them were paralyzed with fear. "Medical emergency," Sarah reported, scanning the trapped beings with her equipment. "They're in shock. Heart rates are dangerously high across all species. They can't move on their own." "The entity's presence is overwhelming them," Kevin observed, watching his energy readings spike. "It's not trying to hurt them, but their fear response is so strong they can't function." Ryan made a decision. "We'll have to carry them out. But first we need to deal with the source of their fear." The shadows around them had grown so thick they seemed solid. The whispers were constant now, rising and falling like a conversation in an alien language. In the center of the gathered darkness, 2 ancient eyes opened and focused on the humans. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for. The first direct contact between humans and the last devourer in the galaxy. Megan stepped forward. "Hello," she said simply. "My name is Megan Foster. Are you the one they called the Devourer?" The shadows shifted and coalesced into a more defined shape. It was still mostly darkness, but now it had a recognizable form. Roughly humanoid but larger, with those ancient eyes that held intelligence and sadness in equal measure. The whispers stopped. For a moment, the only sound was the labored breathing of the terrified aliens behind them. Then the entity spoke, not in whispers but in clear words that somehow translated themselves in their minds. "I am the last," it said. "The last of my kind. I have been called many names, but I remember when my people were called the Seekers." "Seekers?" Kevin asked, his scientific curiosity overcoming caution. "What did you seek?" "Understanding. Connection. The spaces between stars where thought moves freely." The entity's voice carried infinite sadness. "We were explorers of the void, travelers between worlds. But we were also alone by nature. We did not understand that other species feared solitude." Lisa stepped forward. "What happened to your people?" "We were hunted to extinction by those who feared us. They called us devourers, predators, monsters. They could not understand that we fed on emotional energy, not flesh. We tried to communicate, but our very presence caused terror in social species." The entity gestured to the paralyzed aliens, as it still does. "I have been imprisoned here for 50,000 years, fed only scraps of fear from those who accidentally encountered me. I had forgotten what it was like to have a conversation." Jake grinned. "Yeah, you mentioned that when we first met. You seemed pretty surprised that I wasn't scared." "Your species confuses me," the entity admitted. "You are social yet comfortable alone. You are curious about the unknown rather than afraid of it. You are the first beings I have met who respond to my presence with interest rather than terror." Ryan understood the implications. "You're not a prisoner anymore, are you? You could break free whenever you wanted." "I could have escaped decades ago," the entity confirmed. "But where would I go? Every species in the galaxy fears me. I would be hunted again just as my people were before." Megan had an idea. "What if you didn't have to be alone? What if you had a place where you could exist without being feared?" The entity's ancient eyes focused on her with intense interest. "Explain." "The station needs modifications anyway," Megan said, her engineer's mind working through the possibilities. "We could create a dedicated section for you. Not a prison, but a home, somewhere you could exist in peace, with controlled contact with beings who aren't afraid of you." "Humans," the entity said, understanding immediately. "And maybe others eventually," Lisa added, "once they understand that you're not a threat, just different." Kevin was already taking notes on his tablet. "We could study your energy patterns, learn how your people communicated. This could revolutionize our understanding of non-physical intelligence." The entity was quiet for a long moment. Then it began to withdraw its presence from the trapped aliens. As the overwhelming fear lifted from them, they began to recover. The Vortani's crystal bodies brightened. The Chronoc stopped shaking. The Talaxians untangled themselves and looked around with confusion. "You would do this?" the entity asked. "Offer sanctuary to the last of a species that has been feared for millennia?" "That's what humans do," Ryan said with a slight smile. "We help people who need help, even ancient cosmic entities who just want someone to talk to." The rescue operation proceeded smoothly after that. The entity helped guide them through the safest routes back to the surface. The trapped aliens, once free from its overwhelming presence, recovered quickly and were able to walk out on their own. In the control room, Feltar and the other alien representatives watched in amazement as the humans emerged with all 17 rescued beings alive and unharmed. "How?" Feltar asked. "We talked," Lisa said simply. "Turns out the monster was just lonely." Over the following weeks, Megan worked with the station's engineers to create a new living space for the entity. It wasn't a prison or containment facility, but a home designed for a being that existed partially outside normal space. The entity could retreat to the deep spaces it preferred, but also interact with others when it chose to. Jake continued his regular maintenance visits, now officially expanded to include diplomatic consultation with non-corporeal intelligence. He and the entity had become genuine friends, sharing stories about their experiences with isolation and the strange comfort of working alone. Kevin established a research program to study the entity's unique form of existence. His work opened up entirely new fields of xenobiology and non-physical intelligence studies. Lisa wrote a detailed report for Earth Command that would change humanity's role in the Galactic Council. Humans became known as the Void Walkers, the species that could safely interact with dangerous or incomprehensible entities because they understood the difference between being alone and being lonely. The entity, who eventually chose the name Echo for its interactions with humans, became an unofficial advisor to the Council. Its 50,000 years of experience and unique perspective proved invaluable for solving problems that had seemed impossible. And throughout the station, the ancient protocols began to change. Other species still preferred to travel in groups. That was their nature and their comfort. But the fear that had driven those protocols for millennia was replaced by understanding. The halls of the Grand Council Station still echoed with the footsteps of solitary humans walking confidently through spaces that had once been filled with terror. But now those footsteps were sometimes accompanied by the whisper of an ancient presence that had finally found what it had been seeking for 50,000 years. Not prey, not fear, not even food. Friendship. Captain Fletcher concluded his official report with a simple observation. Humanity's greatest strength isn't our technology or our weapons. It's our ability to look at something everyone else fears and ask, "Are you okay? Do you need help?" Sometimes the scariest monsters in the galaxy just need someone to care. The last devourer had become the first ambassador from beyond, and the humans who walked alone had proven that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is extend your hand to something everyone else has given up on. In the depths of space, between the stars where thought moves freely, the memory of an extinct species lived on through friendship rather than fear, and in the halls of the Grand Council Station, no one walked alone anymore, not because they were afraid to, but because they didn't have to.